That's right, the long-rumoured Mimic instrument editor does indeed exist. There's been talk of it for quite some time, and with that came a lot of doubt over whether or not it would actually happen. I can't lie, at times I wasn't sure that it would, but it's finally released alongside a new software update that's required for the support of these new instruments, and a library update which also includes a bunch of new sounds and presets. I'll have a separate video covering all of those. Make sure you're subscribed so that you don't miss it. The instrument editor is currently Windows only, but there is a Mac port in the works which should be available soon. So today I'm going to explain how the editor works and how you can create your own instrument files out of samples that you own. I've also got another video explaining how to install these files onto your module and how you can even package kits up as a library file to install multiple kits in one go. So make sure to check that video out. Also, the multi-layer snare drum that I'll be demonstrating with will be available very soon from my store at the edrumworkshop.com. So if you're in the market for new multi-layer instruments for your Mimic Pro module, keep an eye on the channel and the store. So this is a pre-release version of the editor, but I believe that the final version is going to be pretty much exactly the same. The final version should come with an installer which will make it easy to begin editing, though there are a couple of things to keep in mind before you dive right in. First off, the editor just uses mixed samples, so either mono or stereo bounces. There's no microphone control on the user instruments, so you'll need to make sure that your samples are mixed exactly how you want them beforehand. And where you get your samples from will be up to you. I've got a mixture of my own recorded samples and some VST exports, but you can build instruments from any samples that you own. There are software solutions for exporting samples to make things easier. Some providers have said that personal use like this is fine, but definitely don't go distributing anything and maybe check over the license agreement just to make sure. Next, you want to check the specification of your samples. They need to be either 16 or 24-bit WAV files with a sample rate of 44.1 kHz. It's also best to double check that the sample rate of your audio device is set to 44.1 kHz under the settings of the Mimic instrument editor. Otherwise, your samples might be played back at the wrong pitch when you preview them. This doesn't affect the samples when you put them onto the module, it's just the playback of the preview. There are two types of files that the editor can save or load: project files with the .miprj extension and instrument files with the .mci extension. To put it simply, a project is basically the template that you're going to work from, which stores the assignment of the samples and the general information, whereas the instrument file is the finished self-contained file that gets loaded onto the Mimic. You can edit existing instrument files by opening them in the editor, but the saved samples will be contained within this file and they'll no longer display their full file names. So personally, I find it easier to work on a project file and then save it as a new instrument when I've made changes. And the advantages of working that way is if you do decide to change the mix of your samples and then re-export them to the same location with the same name, when you open the project file, it will load up the new samples in place of the old ones. So when you open the editor, this is how it will look. It's just a completely blank kick instrument, and we're going to change that over to a snare in a minute, but I'll just find my samples, which are on a different hard drive. So this is a snare drum that I've been working on for quite some time, and all of my snare samples, I've divided them into different articulations, which happen to match the articulations from the snare. So I've changed the instrument type to snare, select yes, and this is a snare drum. It's got 6 articulations that you can access on the Mimic, and I've organized all of my samples already because that's just the kind of guy I am. So first off, I'm going to set up a custom instrument name and a custom library name. So I'm going to call the library EDW PP13x7, so hit enter to make sure that saves. And I'm just going to follow the format on the module itself, so I'm going to call it snare PP13x7. 7. Enter. Cool. And you can also set a thumbnail image for your instrument if you want to. The dimensions can be found in here under the settings. I've already created one. So set image, artwork, and there we go. So open that, and that will now display my own snare drum, so that's pretty cool. And then next I need to set up the amount of velocity layers and the amount of round robins per velocity layer. So as you go up in dynamics, it will go through the velocity layers, and at each velocity layer it will also automatically swap between multiple samples on that layer so that you don't get machine gunning. So each instrument type will have a different amount of samples available for it. Snare drums can have 300 samples in total, but that's across all of the articulations. And just so you know, you don't actually have to use all of the articulations if you don't want to. Any blank articulations will just get filled in with whatever's in this first slot here, and then you can distribute the samples however you like. Now, I wanted to fill the entire 300. You don't have to, and for most playable instruments, you definitely won't need to. So here's my little reference list. So I've got 70 head samples, and that's 10 layers and 7 round robins. So I'm going to set these up now. You just click on this, 10 layers, hit enter. That makes 10 layers, 7 round robins, hit enter, and that is now my sample cells for all of my samples. So I'm going to open up the head center, and here are all of my head center samples. Now, the limitation of using the browser here is that I've labeled all of my samples quietest to loudest. So velocity 1 is the lowest level, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 round robins, velocity 2 the next level. But the problem with this is that the Mimic editor actually wants you to do that the other way round. I don't usually use the browser to populate this sample list. What I will actually use is the folder instead. So really simple, go into Head Center, and then what I do is I sort the samples the opposite way round. So all I need to do here is highlight every single one of them. So I'm going to shift, click. All of these are highlighted, and that's now in descending order from loudest to quietest. And all I have to do is drag and drop these samples onto that first cell there, and it automatically fills every single one of them in. And now I can listen back to them all. Sounding good. Then you can just press the calculate velocity button, and as long as you've organized your samples about right in terms of velocity, it will just... I haven't. So it will just sort them out for you, but unfortunately I've actually messed this one up. So let's have a look. The PWR, so that's this number here, is greater than the upper velocity layer. So the average volume of this is louder than the average volume of that. So that's a bit of an issue. So if I swap these around, there we go, so now it works. So I've actually tweaked these samples since I last exported them. It wasn't like that before. But basically, yeah, every sample gets assigned a value by the algorithm that the editor uses, and that's a value based on perceived loudness, so what it sounds like as opposed to the exact peak level of the sample. So if on average this layer is louder than that, it will not be able to calculate the velocity properly. And all you have to do is you can just drag and drop samples around to swap them around. So if you just do this, that swaps these two samples around. So that's what I did there to correct this issue. Then I calculated the velocity, and this is the velocity range now that it's set up based on the loudness of my samples. And generally speaking, you don't really need to ever change this. However, you can manually adjust these. If you look at where these lines are and the velocity values, you can pull that up or down according to what you think feels right. And if you do have awkward samples, you can just use this to bypass the calculate velocity. And then if you want to listen back to these with the round robins intact, press this little RR button, and that will now round robin between all of the samples. And just something else to note as well here, if you do want to get rid of any of these samples individually, you can just right click on one of the cells, and this will say clear cell, yes, get rid of it. Or if you make a mistake with all of them and you want to get rid of all of them, clear all cells, clear all articulation cells, yes, and that completely removes all of those, but it only does it for that one articulation, not for every articulation. So now all I want to do is go through and do this with all of my other articulations. So the rim shot one is ever so slightly different. I'm going to set up 9 layers and 7 round robins, but you don't actually have to fill every single sample slot. It will just ignore any blank ones. So if I now add in my rim shots, you will see that there's one cell missing there at the bottom. Like I say, that's not a problem. You can have an uneven number of round robins on here if you want to. You could have one layer that's only got 3, you could have another layer with 7. But of course, if you do have extreme differences with them, it might sound a bit weird when you're playing them. And then the rim shot side, and there we go. And again, I'll calculate the velocity of every single one of them. Rim, 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 rim. Nice one. So that's my snare drum fully set up. I've got 300 out of 300 samples used. And then if I ever want to come back to this, all I have to do is save a project. So I'll just for the sake of this, I'll create a new folder, and I'll just call that tests. And I'll call this EDW PP13x7 test. So that's the project saved. Now I want to export the instrument file so I can load it onto the Mimic. So save instrument, and now that will save it as the same file name, but it will be a .mci extension. So save that. And then you can always tell that it's still working because you can't highlight anything. There we go, and now it's saved. So that's it, fully exported. So that's how to create an instrument if you've already got all of your samples really nicely organized. If you haven't already got them all organized, you have to do a little bit more of dragging, dropping, listening to it as you go, and then you can just sort of build it up from there and do the calculate velocity to make sure that they're in the right order, that kind of thing. In fact, I'll very quickly just show you this with a tom now. So instrument type tom, yep, clear the instrument because I've already saved it. Go back up, I'll just find those samples. Okay, and I'm going to create a tom from these samples. So there's quite a few samples already exported here, but I know from listening to them that some of them are really, really, really quiet, and then there's a few loud ones. So I'm just going to create, I don't know, at a guess, 5 velocity layers, 4 round robins, and then I've got a bunch of different ones here, and all I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag in the first 4 and just see how they look. So currently a PWR of 89, 74, 73, 72. So let's have a listen to those. They sound like they're on a level, so I'm going to leave those as they are. The next 4, 76, 62. So I'm going to remove that 76 one, get rid of that, and I'll just pull in 27. So now they're all somewhere around the 60-ish mark. The next lot, now this is the weird bit, as I get a little bit lower, it just dramatically drops off, and then there's all of these samples down here are just, for whatever reason, they're all around 5 and 2. I'm not sure how I managed to export them in such a weird way. So I'm just going to add 4 more on the bottom here, and then there we go. So let's have a quick listen to these. Okay, calculate the velocity, and that looks pretty good to me. I'm going to quickly throw together a rim shot. And now, because I just picked a new instrument, it's still got the name of the old one, so I'm just going to quickly change those. And I don't have an image for this one, so I'm just going to leave that as the default image. And then I can save this project, save the instrument, and then now I can load that one into the Mimic as well. Now, you might have noticed here on this list that there's no way to create a hi-hat. Unfortunately, I believe that all of the hi-hats in the Mimic have been optimized specifically for use with their hi-hat engine, and trying to get user hi-hats to work with it just wasn't going to happen apparently. But I'm just going to show off one more thing, which is how to set up a cymbal with a ring out for the choke so that it doesn't just completely mute when you choke it. So I'm just going to bring up some crash samples. Now, the ones that I've got here, there's not that many samples. Let's have a quick listen to that. Yep, that sounds right. So calculate the velocity, and then you go on to choke ring. Now, I believe that on the final version of this editor, it will tell you with a little dialog box that you can only create 1 velocity layer for the choke ring because you don't need multiple velocities. You can have round robins. You probably don't need them. I decided just to go with edge ones because that's what sounded most natural to me. So here I've already exported an edge choke sample. To export this one, I used a choke MIDI note on Superior Drummer, which quickly plays the crash and then chokes it, and then I just trimmed off all of the crash bit and just took that very end section. So this is what that sounds like. Nice and simple. And that's literally it. Now I've got another crash which I'll just start again, and I actually created the mute for this one myself. So I'll just show you how I created this one myself. I'll bring up Reaper. Here's the cymbal chokes. So this is just the loudest cymbal hit sample. This was the beginning of the sample, so I took it all the way down to here, and then I did a really fast fade out on it. But then I added a little bit of this reverberate plugin from Reaper. What this did, I'll just play them in a row, you'll be able to hear what it did. What it's done there is it's added a little bit of an extra sort of ring out shimmer that just sounded a little bit more natural to me than it did before. But you don't have to do that. It's just something that I decided to do. And I just left a little bit beyond the sample just to catch the tail of that reverb plugin. But again, you don't have to do that. You could very easily just turn that off and then just have that and then export this same sample rate, same bit depth. So that then just created this choke sample that sounds like this. and you might need to do a little bit of playing around to get the exact right length, or of course if you're really not that bothered you can just leave this blank and it will just mute to complete silence. And that's pretty much it. With the percussions you get 4 articulations, so hopefully that's something that I'll do down the line. With a kick drum you just get the 1 articulation, the kick drum head, and then with a ride you get bow, bell, edge, and again you get a choke ring sample to use.